Hey guys, welcome to Timeline of Human 1. What we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at the first timeline of humans. Now, I want you guys to think back to the great story and how everything came from nothingness and the planets formed and the galaxies formed and all of the things that needed to happen came together to make the Earth. Do you remember the story about how the water got dirty and the air was yelling at the sun and everybody was mad at each other, and then they figured it out that it wasn't really anybody's fault. It was just something that was happening. But then we talked about the jelly blobs and the timeline of life, and we did all of that work with the different animals and creatures, and boy, there was so much to talk about. And one of the things that we talk about at the end of the timeline of life is how the Earth over time prepared itself for humans. How when humans did show up, the Earth was ready for them. And what we're going to talk about today with the timeline of life, with the timeline of humans, is early humans and what life was kind of like. So let's take a look. We're not going to talk about every single thing on here because that's some of your work to do. But we're going to talk about a few things. So here we go. Now, we're going to start down here and we're going to look at these right here. Okay, these are the ice ages. And this is very similar to what we had on the timeline of life. And we talked about those in the timeline of life. But the ice ages here made it very cold. Okay, do you see the blue line down here? This is how cold it is. And then as things change, as the ice age goes away, things warm up. Okay, and here's the warm air with the red. And what I want you guys to notice is look at this early human. Okay, this early human, well, there's a couple things going on. Number one, they don't have any clothes. Okay, they didn't use clothes back then. They didn't have clothes. No one had invented them yet. And so they were really dependent on their environment. If it got too cold or too hot, they would have to move around. Now, something really important here though is this. Okay, this human is trying to find just the right rock. And you know what? I actually have an example that I like to use in my class, and it's this rock right here. Now, this is just a rock I found when I was hiking at Bowen Pitcher, but I want you guys to look at how it's shaped. Okay, I didn't make this rock just formed. And if you hold it just right, you can see how it kind of gives humans a claw, right? So we could use this to maybe dig up roots or to protect ourselves or to maybe cut up some of this raw meat here. Now, as we move on, the time period between this ice age and this ice age is called the interglacial period. And you can see that it was pretty warm. Now, we didn't really talk too much about this a second ago, but this human's eating raw meat. Right? They didn't know how to cook their meat. They just ate what they could find. Now, as we move on, we can see another ice age here, and it gets really cold, okay? And then some of the continents were moving around, and between the first ice age and this one here, it's almost 100,000 years, so a lot of time has passed. Now, as we move on, we see something else starting to happen here. The humans are starting to use some of their tools to meet their fundamental human needs a little bit better. Sticks and wood and stones prove to be very useful. Now, what we notice here is the water. Now, water was very important. We often, same with a lot of other animals, they need to find sources of fresh water to stay healthy. And so humans would go to these areas as well. Now, up here, you can see how humans were using their stone tools to help them meet their needs by finding meat and other types of food. Okay, let's move on here. Oh, I like this one. So this one is really important, okay? This has to do with early humans taking the stones they find and making them into better tools. Now, I actually happen to have a piece of this here, which is obsidian. Okay, I actually have two of them. Now, these are pieces of obsidian, and it just looks like a normal rock, but if you smash it in just the right way, it will break off little flakes that are so sharp. They're like as sharp as a razor blade. It's pretty amazing. Now, if you look here, here's a piece that actually had some of it broken off. And you can see that it's really shiny. And if I was to smack these together, I could get a sliver of obsidian that would be really sharp. And humans use those for a lot of tools. Now let's keep going here. As you can see, it's been warm for a long time. This is a good time to be living. There's no ice ages, it's pretty comfortable. And then when we get here, you can see humans are starting to wear some clothes. Looks like they figured out how to cover themselves up a little bit. But also, probably more important, is they're starting to use fire and live in caves. Now, this was a really big deal because before this, if you were a human, well, it was pretty tough. There were a lot of creatures that might want to eat us. I mean, we didn't have thick skin, we didn't have big claws, we couldn't run super fast, but we had a really big brain, and we had our special human tools. Now, as you can see here, fire was very important. And as we move down, you can see here, humans started to use fire not only to cook their food, but to give warmth and light at night. Before this, if you wanted light at night, you had to hope that the moon was full or there were lots of stars and it wasn't cloudy. Once we got fire, once fire came around, it changed everything. Super important. Also, we started to really use those caves and make better clothing. You can do some research on these giant mammals down here, but around the time that we started living in caves, some of these giant mammals started to disappear. Now look, we have another ice age, and this ice age is really important because humans now had a tool to help keep them warm. And what we find is that humans started to make more advanced stone tools during this time. And yeah, there's some good, interesting things that happen there. Now, we're not going to talk about all this stuff, but I do want to talk about is this right here. Okay, this is very important. Before this, we used pretty complex tools, but what we have here is a spear, and the spear gave us a really big advantage. Okay, before you had to get pretty close to the creatures that you wanted to hunt, but a spear gave us the opportunity to not only throw it, but also to keep things at a distance. And some of the tools that we started to make with the spear are things that you're probably familiar with, like arrowheads. Okay, now we started to make really good arrowheads that we could attach to sticks, and we could use these to help us meet our fundamental human needs. Okay, we needed to eat, we needed the skins to make clothes. Okay, and the better we got, this is a really good example, the better we got at meeting our fundamental human needs, the more humans survived. Okay, as we continue along, there's another ice age, and we start to use bone. If you look over here, we start to use bone needles to make better clothing. Okay? And then we finally get towards the end of our timeline here, 1 AD. Now we're going to use the second timeline here, and hopefully maybe you can watch it right after this. But there is a lot of information that you can do more research on this lesson. So check with your teacher if you're not in my class about what sort of follow-up work you can do for this lesson. If you are in my class, there are so many things you can research. Giant mammals, living in caves, how humans found fire, making stone tools, early human weapons, how they made shelters, ice ages. Oh boy, there's so many things you could do. But we'll talk about that during class. Thanks, guys.